The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of Blake Motors, one of the largest automobile factories in the country. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The sound of machines that usually filled the air was replaced by worried whispers and the clinking of tools. A massive, high-tech assembly machine, the heart of the factory, had suddenly stopped working the previous night. Without it, production had come to a halt. Every passing minute was costing the company thousands of dollars. Engineers, technicians, and supervisors surrounded the dead machine, their faces pale with frustration. At the center of the chaos stood Sophia Blake, the company's CEO. She was only 32, known for her sharp mind, bold decisions, and fierce leadership. Her father had built this empire, and now it was her responsibility to protect it. But today, she felt helpless. Has anyone figured out what's wrong yet? She demanded, her voice echoing through the hall. Ma'am, one of the senior engineers replied nervously, we've tried everything. The control system isn't responding, and the main drive unit is completely dead. It's beyond our skill. Sophia's eyes narrowed. Beyond your skill? We have the best engineers in the country. They all looked down, avoiding her gaze. After hours of failed attempts, Sophia sighed in exhaustion. She took off her safety glasses and sat on a nearby bench. Unbelievable, she muttered. A machine worth millions, built to perfection, and now it's just a giant piece of junk. The room was silent. Then, in frustration mixed with sarcasm, she laughed and said loudly, "If anyone here can fix this broken thing, I'll marry them myself." Everyone laughed. It was obviously a joke, a CEO marrying a mechanic. Impossible, but her words echoed through the factory. In the back corner of the room, standing quietly among the junior mechanics, was Ethan Cole. He was 35 years old, wearing a faded gray uniform covered in grease stains. His hands were rough, his eyes focused. Unlike the others, he didn't have a fancy engineering degree. He was a small-town mechanic who had joined the company just a few months ago. While everyone laughed at the CEO's words, Ethan didn't smile. He simply looked at the silent machine, gears frozen mid-motion, as if it were calling to him. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, his voice calm but confident, "may I take a look?" Sophia turned toward him a little surprised. "You?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're a maintenance worker, right?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied. "But I've worked with machines like this all my life. Sometimes the smallest fault can bring the biggest systems down. Just give me a chance." The senior engineers exchanged glances, trying not to laugh. One whispered, "This guy thinks he can fix what we couldn't?" Ridiculous. Sophia crossed her arms, half amused, half annoyed. "All right, Mr. Mechanic," she said with a smirk. "Be my guest, but don't make it worse." Ethan nodded and walked to the machine. He ran his fingers across its metal surface, feeling the faint vibrations, the heat trapped inside the panels. To him, machines were like living beings. They spoke in clicks, hums, and rhythms. He knelt down, opened a side panel, and began inspecting the circuits. Sophia watched silently, curious despite herself. There was something about Ethan's calmness that stood out. Unlike the engineers who panicked, he moved with quiet confidence. Minutes passed. The crowd began to lose interest. Some left shaking their heads, but Ethan stayed focused. He opened one compartment after another, studying every detail, as if reading a story only he could understand. After a while, Sophia spoke again. "You really think you can do what an entire team couldn't?" Ethan didn't look up. "Sometimes," he said softly, "machines don't need more brains, they need more patience." Sophia raised an eyebrow. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. As Ethan continued his inspection, he found something unusual, a burnt wire hidden deep behind the main panel. It was small, almost invisible, but to a trained eye like his, it was the clue he needed. He stood up and turned to Sophia. "I think I might have found the problem," he said. Her eyes widened slightly. "Already? You've been at it for less than half an hour." "I'm not sure yet," Ethan replied, "but I'll need some time and maybe a few spare parts." Sophia hesitated, then finally nodded. Fine, you have 2 hours, Mr. Cole. Impress me. Ethan smiled faintly. Challenge accepted. As he walked back toward the machine with his toolbox, the laughter from earlier faded. Something about the way he moved, steady, confident and unafraid, made people wonder if maybe, just maybe, the joke might not stay a joke for long. And for the first time that day, Sophia felt a strange spark, not from the machine, but from the man who dared to believe he could fix the impossible. The factory grew quiet as the sun began to set behind the tall windows of Blake Motors. Most of the engineers had left for the day, their faces still filled with disbelief that a simple mechanic thought he could fix what they couldn't. But Ethan Cole remained, kneeling beside the lifeless machine with nothing but his toolbox, his instincts, and sheer determination. The massive assembly unit stood like a sleeping giant, cold, still, and silent. For years, it had built thousands of cars without fail. Now it was nothing more than a hunk of steel and wires. To everyone else, it was beyond repair. To Ethan, it was a mystery waiting to be solved. He took a deep breath and started by carefully examining the wiring system again. The burnt wire he had found earlier was only part of the problem. As he dug deeper, he noticed signs of overheating near the control module and several misaligned gears in the hydraulic section. Whoever had last serviced the machine clearly hadn't understood its complexity. While the others had relied on computer diagnostics, Ethan trusted his senses. He listened for faint clicks, smelled for burnt residue, and felt for temperature differences across the panels. These were small things most engineers ignored, but to Ethan, they spoke volumes. Hours passed. The only sounds were the hum of the emergency lights and the occasional clink of Ethan's tools. Sweat rolled down his temples as he loosened bolts, adjusted gears, and rewired circuits. He moved with quiet precision, as if performing surgery. Meanwhile, in her glass office upstairs, Sophia Blake watched from a distance. She had told herself she wasn't curious, that she was just making sure he didn't damage the machine further. But deep down, she was intrigued. There was something about Ethan's focus that drew her attention. Unlike her engineers, who panicked under pressure, this man worked as if failure wasn't even an option. She poured herself a cup of coffee and murmured, "Who are you really, Ethan Cole?" Down below, Ethan connected the final wire and stood up slowly. He tested the main fuse. No spark, no smoke. A good sign. He then reattached the protective panels and reset the main switch. For a moment, the lights flickered, but the machine remained silent. He sighed and sat on the floor, thinking. Then suddenly, he remembered something. An old principle his father had once told him: when a machine refuses to move, don't force it. Listen to what it's trying to tell you. Ethan got up again and placed his hand gently on the side of the assembly unit. He noticed a faint vibration, not from power, but from pressure imbalance. The hydraulic valve wasn't responding. That was it, the hidden problem. The valve was a rare model, custom-made for Blake Motors' design. Replacing it would normally take days, but Ethan had no time. He had promised Sophia results by midnight. So he did the unthinkable. He decided to build a temporary valve from scratch using spare parts. He scavenged through the storage room, collecting scraps of metal, a broken pressure regulator, and an old circuit board. Using his welding kit and years of hands-on experience, he crafted a small but precise replacement. Every spark that flew from his welding torch lit up his determined face. When he was done, he installed the handmade valve and reconnected the hydraulic system. The entire setup looked risky, fragile even, but he believed in it. He flipped the switch again. At first, there was silence, then a slow hum. The ground trembled softly as the machine's internal systems began to awaken. Lights flickered across the control panel, and the robotic arms slowly moved back to life. One by one, the gears started turning, the conveyors rolled forward, and the entire unit began operating smoother than before. The impossible had happened. The machine was alive again. Sophia, watching from her office, stood up in shock. "No way," she whispered. She ran downstairs just as workers began gathering, their eyes wide with amazement. Ethan stood there, wiping grease from his hands, calm as ever. Sophia walked up to him, disbelief in her voice. You actually did it?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I told you, sometimes machines just need someone who listens." The crowd erupted into applause. Engineers who had laughed at him earlier now stared in awe. The machine that had been declared dead by experts was running better than ever, thanks to one man's patience and skill. Sophia crossed her arms, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. "Well, Mr. Cole," she said with a hint of humor, "I guess I owe you something. I did say I'd marry whoever fixed it." The workers laughed again, but this time it wasn't mockery, it was admiration. Ethan chuckled softly. "I remember that, ma'am. But I didn't do it for a promise. I did it because machines, like people, deserve a second chance." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. For the first time, the powerful CEO felt something unexpected, respect, maybe even admiration. There was something genuine about this man that none of her polished executives had ever shown. As the factory lights flickered back to full brightness, Sophia said quietly, "Ethan Cole, you might just be the best thing that ever happened to Blake Motors." And with that, the legend of the mechanic who fixed the impossible was born, though neither of them realized. This was only the beginning of a story far greater than any machine. The story of Ethan Cole spread through Blake Motors like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone in the company, from factory workers to executives, was talking about the mechanic who did the impossible. The dead machine, which had once threatened to shut down production for weeks, was now running better than ever. Orders resumed, profits returned, and the crisis was officially over. But for Sophia Blake, something else had begun. She couldn't stop thinking about the man who had fixed what the best engineers couldn't. There was something about Ethan's quiet strength that fascinated her. She had built her career on control, logic, and precision. Yet Ethan had done something no calculation could predict. He had listened, believed, and succeeded. Later that afternoon, she called her assistant. "Invite Mr. Ethan Cole to my office," she said. Within minutes, Ethan walked in, still in his worn-out uniform, hair slightly messy, a faint streak of grease on his sleeve. Despite standing before the CEO of a billion-dollar company, he looked completely at ease. Sophia smiled politely. "Please sit." He nodded, taking a seat across from her large glass desk. "I wanted to thank you personally," she began. "What you did last night saved this company from a massive loss. I owe you more than words." Ethan shrugged modestly. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Sophia tilted her head, intrigued by his simplicity. "Your job?" "No, Mr. Cole, you did more than anyone here could. You built a part with your hands, from scrap, and brought the whole factory back to life. That's not just work, that's genius." He gave a small smile. "Machines are honest, Ms. Blake. They don't lie. They break when they're tired, and they work when they're cared for." That line made her pause. There was truth and poetry in his words, something rare in the corporate world she lived in. After a long silence, she said softly, "Would you join me for dinner tonight?" "As a thank you?" Ethan blinked in surprise. "Dinner with you?" "Yes," Sophia replied with a faint smirk. "Don't worry, it's not another joke." That evening, they met at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. Sophia arrived first, dressed elegantly but simply. When Ethan walked in, freshly showered, wearing a plain white shirt and black jacket, she almost didn't recognize him. The confident mechanic from the factory now looked like someone entirely different, calm, grounded, and effortlessly dignified. They sat across from each other as the lights of the city sparkled below. "So," Sophia began, "tell me about yourself. How does a man like you end up fixing million-dollar machines?" Ethan chuckled. "By breaking them first," he said. "I grew up in a small town. My father was a mechanic. He used to fix old tractors and motorbikes. I learned by watching him. We didn't have money for new parts, so we had to make things work with what we had. Sophia listened intently. His voice was steady, his words simple but powerful. And you? Ethan asked, leaning forward slightly. How does someone like you end up running the biggest car company in the country? Sophia smiled. By never stopping. My father built this company from nothing. When he passed away, people said I was too young to lead. I had to prove them wrong. Their eyes met. Two people from different worlds who had both learned how to fight in their own ways. As the night went on, their conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about work, dreams, and life beyond the factory. Sophia laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Ethan, usually quiet and serious, found himself opening up too. When the dinner ended, Sophia didn't want to say goodbye. Standing by her car, she turned to him and said, "You know, I meant it when I said I owe you." Ethan smiled. "You don't owe me anything. Miss Blake, you already gave me something I never expected, respect." Those words stayed with her long after she drove away that night. Over the following weeks, Ethan's life changed. He was promoted to Chief Technical Advisor, leading the maintenance and innovation teams. His designs started improving production efficiency, and the company's profits soared. But beyond work, something else grew quietly, a bond between him and Sophia. They shared coffee breaks, exchanged ideas, and spent hours discussing projects. Sophia found herself seeking his opinion more often than anyone else's. He wasn't intimidated by her position, and she wasn't bothered by his humble background. People in the company began to whisper, "The CEO and the mechanic." Impossible, but neither of them cared. They weren't just two colleagues anymore. They were two minds drawn together by trust, curiosity, and unspoken admiration. One evening, as they walked through the quiet factory floor, Sophia stopped beside the same machine he had once revived. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "if that night changed more than just this company?" Ethan looked at her, a small smile forming. "Maybe it fixed more than one broken thing," he replied. Sophia's heart skipped for a moment. She didn't know if it was the hum of the machines or the sound of something new, something real, beginning between them. Months had passed since the night Ethan Cole brought the heart of Blake Motors back to life. The once broken assembly machine now ran smoother than ever, and so did the company itself. Production records were being shattered, profits were soaring, and the media called it the Blake Miracle. But inside the company walls, another miracle was quietly unfolding between Sophia Blake, the brilliant CEO, and the humble mechanic who had changed everything. They had grown close, closer than either expected. Their bond wasn't built on luxury dinners or romantic gestures, but on respect, trust, and understanding. Sophia admired Ethan's honesty and intelligence, while Ethan admired her strength and compassion. And yet, despite everything, neither had spoken about their feelings directly. They both knew the world was watching, a CEO and a mechanic from completely different worlds. But sometimes, love doesn't ask for permission. It simply happens. The ceremony. It was a bright Friday morning, and the entire company had gathered for the annual Innovation Excellence Ceremony. It was the biggest event of the year, held in a massive hall filled with employees, journalists, and business leaders from across the country. Sophia stood backstage, calm yet thoughtful. Her heart pounded a little faster that day, not because of the speech she was about to give, but because she had decided something life-changing. Ethan, unaware of what was coming, sat in the front row wearing a crisp suit for the first time in his life. He didn't like attention, but Sophia had personally invited him to attend. When she finally walked on stage, the crowd erupted in applause. She looked confident, elegant, and powerful, the image of a woman who had built an empire. But her eyes searched for only one face, his. When she found Ethan in the crowd, she smiled softly before beginning her speech. 6 months ago, she began, this company faced one of the worst crises in its history. Our most important machine failed, and with it, our entire operation was at risk. The audience grew quiet. Many experts tried and failed. But then a man, not an engineer, not a designer, but a mechanic, stepped forward when no one else would. He didn't have fancy degrees or titles. What he had was heart, courage, and an unshakable belief that nothing is impossible. She paused, her voice steady but full of emotion. That man is Ethan Cole. The hall burst into applause as the spotlight turned toward Ethan. He shifted awkwardly in his seat. Not used to the attention, Sophia continued. Ethan didn't just fix a broken machine. He reminded us what leadership truly means. Not power or position, but passion and purpose. Then she looked down for a moment, took a deep breath, and smiled nervously, a rare sight for someone like her. "And there's something else," she said softly. "When that machine broke, I made a joke, one I never thought would matter. I said, whoever fixes it, I'll marry them." The crowd laughed warmly, remembering the famous story. Sophia continued, her voice calm but heartfelt. "At the time, I didn't realize how true those words would become, because what started as a joke turned into something very real." Gasps filled the hall as she looked directly at Ethan. "Ethan Cole," she said, her tone trembling slightly, "you didn't just save my company. You taught me patience, humility, and what it means to truly care. You showed me that strength doesn't come from status. It comes from sincerity. And somewhere between our arguments, our ideas, and our endless cups of coffee. You stole my heart," Ethan froze. For a man who could fix anything, he suddenly had no idea what to do. Sophia smiled through her nervousness and stepped down from the stage. The cameras followed her every move as she walked toward him, her heels clicking softly on the floor. The hall was silent, everyone holding their breath. Standing before him, Sophia took his hand and said, "So, Mr. Cole, this time I'm not joking. Will you marry me?" The crowd gasped, then burst into wild applause. People stood on their feet, cheering, whistling, shouting his name. Ethan looked into her eyes, those confident, determined eyes that now held something softer. Love. He smiled, the same quiet, humble smile that had once calmed her during chaos. "I thought you'd never ask," he said. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and the hall filled with joy. Sophia laughed in relief, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. Ethan stood up and without hesitation wrapped his arms around her. In that moment, it didn't matter who was the CEO or who was the mechanic. It didn't matter who came from where. All that mattered was that two people, from two very different worlds, had found something truly rare. Love, born out of respect, trust, and courage. Epilogue. A year later, a new plaque was added at the factory entrance. It read, "To the man who fixed the impossible," and reminded us that the greatest machines are built not by hands, but by heart. And beside it stood a photograph of Sophia and Ethan, partners in work, life, and love, smiling in front of the same machine that had once brought them together. The joke that started everything had become a legend, and a promise that dreams, like machines, can come alive when you believe.